I don't think I have to tell you that children of mentally ill parents are at risk to develop problems themselves. Many research has been done, and most of the time adolescents receive a little bit less attention than childhood, and it's a really important developmental phase as rates of psychological problems increase during this phase. And one risk factor of the developing problems could be that adolescents partly take over the parental role in the family when their mentally ill parent has difficulties to fully carry out that role. There are several names for this, role reversal. We adopted the definition of Hooper and colleagues of parentification. And this is said that parentification is a type of role reversal, boundary distortion, and inverted hierarchy between parents and other family members in which adolescents assume developmentally inappropriate levels of responsibility in the family of origin. Some research has been done on parentification. Parentification has been studied retrospectively in adults, so meaning that adults were asked, were you parentified as a child, looking back? There has been studies on adolescent parentification, so really asking the adolescents about how they were helping at home in other stressful family situations, but these were mostly cross-sectional, so they didn't look at how it affected problem behavior over time in the adolescents. And there were other stressful family situations, but no studies have looked at current parental mental health issues. So what we did in our present study, we examined the effect of adolescent parentification, so they reported it themselves, on internalizing and externalizing problems in adolescents with a mentally ill parent, and not only cross-sectionally, but only to look if parentification could predict problem behavior over time. And in addition, we were wondering why could this be the case, if it's the case. If it's related to problem behavior, could it be that stress explains this relation? So we looked at stress as a mediator in our model. Then the participants, we have recruited families with a mentally ill parent through different ways, general practitioners, mental health institutions, but also advertisements in schools. And because most of the families came from schools, it's mostly a community-based sample. We based parental mental illness on the self-report of the parents, and we had a confirmation of either the general practitioner, mental health institution, or they scored above certain cutoff points on validated questionnaires. And in our study, we had various parental mental health issues in the sample. These numbers are based on their self-report, so 45% said they had mood problems, 25% anxiety problems, and 11% personality disorder. So this is just a few examples. In total, 118 adolescents participated in the study both at time 1 and time 2, and time 2 was 1 year later. Of them, 70% had a mother with a mental illness and 30% a father with a mental illness. They were around 13.5 years at baseline for the study, so at time 1. Gender was quite equally distributed. Most of them were living with both parents, and most of them had at least one sibling. How did we measure parentification? We used the Parentification questionnaire Youth. It's a 20-item questionnaire, and adolescents could answer with either yes or no, so it's statements. We used the sum score in the analysis. These are a couple of items. I often feel more like an adult than a child in my family. I often have to do other family members' chores, do a lot of the cooking at home. I often feel like a referee in my family, and it seems that people in my family bring me their problems. So we have a little bit of an idea what this questionnaire measures. To measure problem behavior in the adolescents, we used to use self-report. We use the internalizing problem sub-scale. They could range it on does not apply to me to does apply to me. And the internalizing problem scale consists of 3 subscales. The anxious depressed subscale, for instance, I cry a lot and I'm afraid to go to school. Withdrawn depressed, such as I'm shy and I would rather be alone than with others. And somatic complaints, I feel dizzy or overtired without good reason. And we also looked at externalizing problems, and this scale consists of aggressive behavior, such as physically attacking people and getting in fights, and rule-breaking behavior, so stealing from home, other places than home, lying, cheating, those things. To measure stress, we used a 4-item perceived stress scale, ranging from never to very often. And one item is how many times did you have the feeling that important matters in your life were beyond your control? These are correlations, and I think these are the most important ones to show you. So parentification was strongly related to both stress and problem behavior at baseline, but also 1 year later, so this is purely correlational. We did regression analyses. We controlled for age, gender, and for the recruitment strategy. So first I will show you the cross-sectional results, so everything is filled out at the baseline. We found that parentification was positively related to internalizing problems. So more parentification is related to more feelings of anxiety and depression. And then we included stress into the model to see if that could explain this relation. What you can see is that the numbers are standardized regression weights, so betas. What you can see is that the relation between parentification and internalizing problems disappears when including stress in the model. This means that stress indeed explained why parentification was related to internalizing problems. Then externalizing problems, again, positively related, parentification related to more externalizing problems. And here, although the strength of the association was a little bit less, parentification was still related to externalizing problems when including the stress. So this means that stress did explain why, but it's not the only reason why. So it partly explains why it's related. So there are other variables that do something in this relationship. Then longitudinal, so parentification time 1 and the problem behavior 1 year later. And we only found an effect of parentification predicting more internalizing problems over time. So we did not find an effect for externalizing. And we also didn't find a median effect of stress. So a baseline, yes, it is an explaining variable, but in the at least 1 year later, it does not explain why this relation is present. So what we could conclude from this study is that parentification is related to both internalizing and externalizing problems in adolescents with a mentally ill parent. That perceived stress partly explains why this is related, and that more parentification predicts more internalizing problems 1 year later. So could you say that parentification is a bad thing only? Or could it be helpful as well? And I now like to give you this to tell something about implications for practice.
Maybe is there some response already from the room? Do you think is it strange that we find a relationship between parentification and problems in child development. So is parentification bad? I just showed you a definition, and it's mainly parentification is role reversal. So the child takes over responsibilities of parents. So take over the role of mother, or take care of the siblings. Yeah.
Well, I definitely think it creates a lot of challenges for kids, but kids have often also gain skills of competence or executive function.
Yes.
Confidence that they can handle stuff.
Yes. So that's the more the helpful thing. So does it might help also in the development of the child that they have a responsibility and that they get something back out of it.
I think you have to be careful with that kind of statement though, because coming out of something that's negative and coming out with a positive doesn't make it a positive experience.
No. I agree.
I always wonder, because it seems to assume that the parent has somehow abdicated their parenting role, and I think that's a really important thing to consider, that it's not, that the parent is still there parenting, and I always kind of am a little nervous about parentification, because that there is some sort of underlying assumption that the parent has kind of taken a step back and let go of the parenting role.
So when, in the young carer stuff we've done, we make a distinction. We say that all parentified children are young carers, but not all young carers are parentified children.
Exactly. Yeah. I agree with.
Yes?
I find it interesting that more moms, 70% identify with mental illness, yet the kids that are affected are half and half. And I would think that more girls, so only 51%, I would think more girls would be more affected because of same-sex role model.
No. Can you say something about it?
Yeah, we have looked at it as a moderator. There were differences in current parentification, so girls scored higher on parentification than boys. But when looking at this relation, there were no differences between boys and girls. So we did look at it, but yeah.
So we found the same in our young carer research too, almost an even split, which is unlike the adult population where women are more likely to be the carers in the family. So we thought that it was just whoever is available steps forward,
Right.
you know,
And
and that
makes sense.
13 years old is kind of the age that you're teenage.
Yeah,
When it first appears, or that sort of 13. It was about 13 years old.
Yeah, in our study, yes.
Right.
But it can appear, of course, earlier.
Yeah.
I've seen children of 5.
Yeah.
Yes. Taken care of.
Yes. Did you measure the, sorry, I didn't mean to just jump in.
Doesn't matter.
When you were looking at the parentification, I mean, did you also look at the kinds of things they were doing? Like, did you ask about particular tasks and roles that they actually were involved in?
We wanted to, in the parentification literature, there's a little bit about emotional and instrumental parentification. Unfortunately, in this measure, it's a bit vague. We try to do factor analysis to capture different things, but there were not clear factors. So I think it would be good to look into that again, or another way maybe to see, if there are differences. But with this measure, these two, emotional versus instrumental, were not clear enough. Two different concepts to really make. It's not a 10 item.
It's not, there's no item.
No.
What we've seen is, which I think was mentioned in your slides, but not just taking care of the parent, but taking care of other siblings. It's a huge part of what kids take over.
Yes. I was talking yesterday to my Norwegian colleague, and she said there's a Norwegian psychologist who makes a difference between adaptive parentification and disruptive parentification. So the adaptive are the children, maybe they adapt to the situation and they take over, and it's no, they don't develop problems. But the disruptive, they are disturbed in their development. So that's could be interesting to see if we might find in our results this type of parentification instead of instrumental or emotional. It's so not so useful.
Wouldn't you also become a matter of degree? Some
Yes,
kids are
yeah.
taking over a whole lot and others.
Yes.
some
And length
but-
of time as
Yes.
well.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yes.
1 week versus 2 years.
Do you have another suggestion?
Well, I struggle with adaptive not, because it's a moment in time evaluation.
Yeah.
You know, and so you get children who are more mature or pseudo-mature, that they look like they're doing fine, but if you ask them as an adult to look back and what have they lost in the process, you often get a very different answer.
I agree. Yes. And especially because you saw it's mainly also internalizing problems,
Yeah.
and that's also sometimes difficult to see, that they or to be aware of as a child that you have depression, or because you want to go on and you think it's okay like it is, so they don't recognize it themselves, but that could also be a problem. Let's see what I got. So what we found was that parentification leads to problem development. And I thought it's a topic you could discuss with the parents. If you are in a family, that's we meet families, and you see the child is doing a lot in the housekeeping or taking or feeling very responsible, I think it's important to discuss this with the parents. Is this your experience as well? And also, I think it's important to find some compensation for the child, so that the child is allowed to have friends and to go to sports club, that kind of thing. Because sometimes the children they say, "I have no time. I have to be at home. I have to take care." And another thing what we had an experience with is that some children, well, when we talked about it, they said, "Well, I need to do this," because they are, of course, this has to do with loyalty, and so you can't take it away immediately. So you have to explain that's important for the child to do other things, but also maybe keep a little bit of this responsibility, and that might be this more adaptive parentification. And also talking with the parents, and the parents allow them to do something else. And also that the parents are aware that it's not healthy for the child to take over this role. And how can we integrate it in our interventions, in the COPMI interventions? Yes?
Well, so I wonder if there isn't a need for even a further distinction, though, in terms of interventions. That there's a big difference, for example, between intervening with a family where the parent's a clinically defined narcissist and the child is parentified there, or the parent's just got, for example, a very serious chronic condition that makes them look inward and puts parentification in play. But there's still kind of the reciprocal relationship of sorts.
Yes.
You know, so I think we need two sets of interventions there, which I find is sometimes it's a problem in all of our interventions with families and young people, is we still tend to, I'm generalizing way out, but we still tend to clump people together as opposed to looking at the distinctions and the need for different interventions.
So tailor it.
Yeah.
Just look how the function is in the family, maybe.
Yeah.
And the role, and how important it is for the child.
Yeah.
I think in our communities, there's a lot of cultural diversity. And so then there's a whole other level of amount of normal caregiving that family members share. And kids are expected to do certain things, and that's culturally appropriate. And so then, there's trying to help figure out what's more functional helping and what's, harmful helping. But that's another complication.
Yes.
Because it's normal in a lot of families.
Yeah, and can you give an example of a cultural?
Well, certain cultures, there's a real value, expectation that children help out, that they do take care of their younger siblings. And it's considered their job or their a value in the family, an expectation.
Well, we've also found grandparents too in that aspect as well. Different groups, keep their elders at home, and so it's kind of assumed that the child will help out intergenerationally.
Right. Right, with an older grandparent who's got medical issues,
Yeah.
So then kind of teasing out what's
And how is that different from
and what's psychologically really harmful.
what's too much and what does too much mean?
So the
Grant life.
So I think this is one we have to be careful of, because filial duty, which say, for example, in Chinese American or Chinese Canadian families, or Chinese Australian families, or Chinese families, I mean, filial duty is an historical, traditional way of family. But it's not significantly different than traditional Dutch families would have been 100 or 200 years ago. It has something to do with size of family and family resources. But what's really thrown a wrench into all of this is that the families are getting much smaller because of industrialization, and so those traditional ways of supporting in family and the beliefs that supported them are starting to change. In North America, we're seeing significant changes there. And even in China, though, where the Chinese government has just had to enact a law saying you have to take care of your parents and your grandparents. If that was still a deep cultural belief, you wouldn't need a law like that. So this is this clumping I'm talking about again, is we tend to accept at face value what we're told without necessarily looking deeper beyond it. And I think our interventions have to get deeper.
Absolutely. Along with the assumption that it's somehow bad to have kids help take care of anybody in the home,
right?
Which
developmentally it's a good thing.
No. Well, absolutely, and so then you have to take into consideration things like culture and social norms
But how do you find the family or the children, or how can you help the children in case it's disturbing for them or for their development? And that's a difficult issue.
It seems to me that identifying what the boundaries could be or should be, like, washing dishes is one thing, but counseling the parent or giving advice on whether or not they should leave their spouse, is that appropriate for a child to be asked? And so those are kind of the things that maybe the parent needs to be able to have the discussion about what's appropriate for
But I
for
think
your kid to take on.
then you start with the parent.
And even the child, letting them know, helping them to identify where they need to set boundaries with their parents, with an extraordinarily needy parents.
I think in Thailand, if, like you said, Chinese believe that we need to take care of the parents or the grandparents, that is for the general belief. But if the parent has a mental illness, because we have the extended family, so the other sibling, the sister of the mother or the sister of the father will take care of them, will take the role, because they will lead the children to have the normal development, and they become
So extended family step in.
yes, step in to help that, and not place the role to the children.
Yeah, but it has to do with culture. This has to do with culture.
Yes.
And what we also in practice experience is that there is a lot of stigmatizing. So these families are isolated. So there's no, even isolated by their own families. I think it's probably the same here. But that's, and then the families don't step in. They are ashamed of what's happening and they avoid it. So that's also a problem. I have one minute. Okay. This was the discussion. How to integrate in cognitive intervention, and your experience, and you gave us already some experience, and it's nice to hear. Maybe we can take that with us. And I want to thank you also for listening to us and also discuss this with us. Thank you.
Thank you.